Hello everyone and welcome to another Cut Rate Commander Precon Upgrade Guide, the series where we take a look at Precon decks and bring them up to cut rate standards. My name is Grazzet, and today we'll be looking at the Sliver Swarm Precon from Commander Masters and its face commander, Sliver Gravemother, which, due to the increased price of the deck, will be bringing up from its roughly $85 price point to an increased budget of $135 after upgrades. But before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content and would like me to continue making more videos like this in the future. And if you're feeling particularly generous, please consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description to keep me caffeinated as I work on more of these builds, or instead use our newly acquired affiliate link with Game Nerds in the description below if you're looking to purchase sealed MTG product for Commander Masters or any of the other sets that they offer for some of the lowest prices around, all while helping out the channel as you do so. Also, be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see which Precon upgrade we'll be covering next. So, with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. Sliver Gravemother is a 6/6 sliver with Encore 5 that costs Swooberg and has the following abilities. Firstly, the legend rule doesn't apply to slivers we control. And secondly, each sliver creature in our graveyard has Encore X, where X is equal to its mana value. Breaking down her core stats, Sliver Gravemother is sporting a decent-sized and complex CMC consisting of all 5 colors, though for the cost we are getting an above-average stat block with Encore to allow us to temporarily create 3 copies of her from our graveyard, and a pair of abilities that allow us to Encore out our entire tribe from the bin, including legendary entrants, to ensure they get one last opportunity to attack our opponents from beyond the grave. Taking a closer look at her second ability first, since it is the more powerful of the two, it simply provides all our slivers with temporary reanimation that not only gets our tribe members back into play for a turn with haste, but typically also gets us 3 copies of them, which, considering this tribe's entire gimmick is to flood the board with as many slivers as possible, with each sliver powering up all other slivers with their abilities, makes this not only a very powerful means for us to build up our board with tribe members so their brethren can power them up, but also lets us triple up on any abilities that the Encored Slivers bring to the table, whether those be non-keyword abilities we can use to generate a huge amount of value, and or that we can use to wreak havoc on our opponent's board states, or just flat stat increases to provide our slivers with a gigantic power boost to alpha strike in with. This then leads nicely into her first ability, which allows us to encore our legendary slivers without having to worry about their token copy sacking themselves due to being legendary, including the Gravemother herself, often making it the correct choice to allow her to go to the graveyard when she's destroyed so we can encore 3 copies of her later to generate a huge amount of board presence, and then sending her to the command zone when she would be exiled by Encore so she can be cast normally again. Additionally, should we be inclined to do so, it also allows us to use clone effects to create copies of our legendary slivers as well, which can make some of our very powerful sliver tribe members even more powerful, provided we can afford them in the first place. So, as we can clearly see, Sliver Gravemother is a sliver tribal commander who specializes in getting us value out of the graveyard via her tribal encore effect, shoring up slivers' innate weakness against having their boards destroyed by arguably making them even more dangerous while they're in the graveyard. And honestly, the base build does a near perfect job at providing our commander with plenty of powerful slivers that are great on their own, but amazing when encored, ranging from sliver lords that power up their brethren to make them even deadlier in combat, to slivers that grant stackable keywords or abilities to grant the build additional reach, disruption, and or value, which is further supported by keyword granting slivers to further enable and protect our tribe members, as well as some excellent tribal support pieces to generate us even more value. That said, despite its creature base and tribal support being near perfect out of the box, this deck, in my opinion, is severely lacking in 2 critical areas that prevent it from functioning at its maximum potential. Firstly, being the lesser of the 2 issues, the base build's removal package is incredibly underwhelming, consisting of only 7 pieces total, none of which are at flash speed, 1 of which is soft removal in the form of goad, and 2 of which only deal with planeswalkers in lieu of burn. And while yes, we can make the argument that keeping our Slivers alive is more important than disrupting our opponent's board so that we can win through their self-synergies, without at least some reliable removal, we may find ourselves stopped dead in our tracks against effects that would prevent us from taking advantage of our wide board states, or, even worse, losing outright due to us not being able to deal with an opponent's threat or with their source of value. So we'll be making a concentrated effort in improving the deck's removal package to ensure we have the means to deal with our opponent's threats more effectively. And secondly, being the much bigger issue, is the core build's land base, which can accurately be described as glacial, consisting of 16 lands that come into play tapped, and 5 more lands that can situationally come into play tapped, usually resulting in a very slow start for a tribe whose sole purpose is to flood the board with bodies as quickly as possible, often causing the build to lag behind even the slowest decks at the table, which is clearly unacceptable. As such, we'll be dedicating a large chunk of our upgrade budget to completely overhaul our land base, cutting slow fetch lands and bicycle lands in favor of Painlands to ensure our Slivers hit the board at a reasonable rate without sacrificing consistency, and even subbing out some of our tri-lands in favor of some new Commander Triomes to give our non-basic land ramp spells more targets to hit to improve the build's consistency even further, all of which should hopefully speed up our deck considerably. Then, with the critical issues taken care of, we'll be spending the remaining budget on providing some quality of life changes to the deck via cutting some of our less powerful tribe members in favor of some lower CMC slivers to help us build up our board and get our game plan rolling faster, as well as adding in some Creatures Matter support pieces to take advantage of the huge amount of slivers we have in our 99 to generate additional value, ensuring that the Sliver Hive Mind will have all the resources it needs to bring our opponents to their knees. So let us travel to the island of Riptide, located off the coast of Otaria on the plain of Dominaria and home to the ill-fated Riptide project. It was here, nearly 2 centuries ago, that a conglomeration of human and cephalid researchers constructed a massive facility whose sole purpose was the study of the long-extinct sliver species, based on long-dead fossils discovered in the ruins of Stronghold deep in the swamps of Urborg. But now, all that remains of that facility are ruins, broken equipment, and the long-dead remains of the research teams. For in their hubris, they sought to recreate the deadliest, most adaptable and cunning predators the multiverse has ever seen, joined together under an alien hive mind for the sole purpose of multiplying and mutating, far beyond the control of any would-be masters. And as their creations broke free from containment, bypassed their security measures, and fell upon them with fang and claw, they realized, in their horror, that they had succeeded. So, now that we have a better understanding of the commander and playstyle, let's take a look at the cards we'll be keeping from the base build. Starting off with the creatures we'll be keeping from the core build, seeing as the base build's creature base is already incredibly self-synergistic right out of the gate, we'll be retaining most of its entrants as they already do what this deck wants to do quite well. For example, Gale Rider Sliver, Winged Sliver, and Cloud Shredder Sliver will all be staying in as means to make our slivers evasive via granting them flying, with Cloud Shredder Sliver also granting them haste so they can put their newly obtained evasion to work as soon as they come down. Shifting Sliver keeps its position by effectively making our entire tribe unblockable except by other slivers, and a two-headed Sliver staying in as well by granting our entire tribe menace, which may not be as good as other forms of evasion, but is often enough to allow our wide board states to get in for extra damage. Then from there, we'll of course be keeping most of the other keyword distributing slivers included in the base build to power up our boards even further, with Striking Sliver, Venom Sliver, Sentinel Sliver, Siphon Sliver, and Bone Sight Sliver all retaining their positions as sources of AoE First Strike, Death Touch, Vigilance, Lifelink, and a Double Strike respectively, to make all our slivers that much more effective on offense as well as defense. Lazotep Sliver retaining its spot to grant our slivers Afflict 2 and on death amass 2 to make them deadly even when blocked or destroyed. Quick Sliver making the cut thanks to providing Tribal Flash to allow us to cast most of our creature base at instant speed, enabling us to play around removal and wipes in doing so. Hatchery Sliver remaining in the deck as a way for us to get extra copies of our Slivers into play via Replicate to further build up our board and double up on effects if we have the mana to spare. And Crystalline Sliver and Sliver Hive Lord staying in to provide our Slivers with removal protection via their Shroud and Indestructibility granting to ensure they stick around for as long as possible to empower and be empowered by their broodmates. Then to provide our Slivers with even more protection, we'll be hanging on to both Clot Sliver and Crypt Sliver as a means to regenerate our tribe members if our opponents are able to destroy them, Diffusion Sliver to provide them with a Pseudo Ward 2 to make targeting them with effects that much more difficult, and Hibernation Sliver to give us a manaless way to bounce our Slivers back to hand to dodge removal and wipes entirely, or, if need be, to reproc any cards that care about Slivers or creatures being cast or entering play. Then switching gears from protecting our Slivers to powering up their stat blocks, we'll of course be keeping Sinew Sliver, Might Sliver, and Megantic Sliver as Tribal Lords to power up their tribe members, as well as Blade Sliver, Bone Splitter Sliver, and Cleaving Sliver to provide them with a purely offensive power boost instead, all of which are individually powerful, but, if encored out with our commander, can provide truly mind-boggling board-wide stat boosts to our brood to enable back-breaking alpha strikes. Then with our Sliver empowering sources covered, we'll be pivoting yet again to Slivers we'll be retaining to help pad the build's core stats, such as Gemhide Sliver and Mana Weft Sliver, both of whom turn their brethren into mana dorks that tap for any color to provide ramp and fixing for our 5-color deck. The card advantage generating Slivers Synapse Sliver, Capricious Sliver, Regal Sliver, and the honorary Sliver Realm Walker, all of which draw us cards in some shape or form to ensure we have the resources we need to keep the tribal game plan rolling, with Regal Sliver also serving as a repeatable AoE pump effect if it's already granting us draw through the Monarch to power up our board even further, and Constricting Sliver, Harmonic Sliver, and a Necrotic Sliver all serving as solid targeted removal sources with the Tribal O-Ring, Back Row Destruction, and self-sacking permanent destruction they turn our Slivers into, which Taunting Sliver supplements even further with the soft removal it provides via its repeatable Goat effect, as do Lava Belly Sliver and Spiteful Sliver, which can easily inflict damage to Planeswalkers or to our opponents' faces if they have no walkers to target. And then as our only other Sliver entrant that made the grade, we have Brood Sliver, who turns all our Slivers into tribal token generators to further build up our board with bodies that can benefit from all of the previously mentioned abilities we've covered. And lastly, as our only non-Sliver creature from the base build that we're holding on to, we have the new Titan of Littjara, which can turn itself into a Sliver when it ETBs, but doesn't count as a Sliver in the bin or in the 99, meaning it doesn't synergize with our commander's encore granting or some of our draw sources that care about Slivers being cast or being in the deck, but makes up for it by being a repeatable source of draw that scales with the amount of Slivers we have in play when it ETBs and every time it attacks, providing us with more and more value with each passing turn as we continue to build up our board. Then moving on to our instant carryovers, we'll be holding on to the only instant included in the base build, that being For the Ancestors, which serves as a superb piece of flash speed tribal draw that, thanks to the critical mass of Slivers in our 99, can easily draw us at least 2, but more often than not 3 or even 4 Slivers off our top 6 twice per game thanks to Flashback to ensure we can get more and more tribe members onto the battlefield. It's then on to our sorcery holdovers, which will be primarily consisting of the ramp sources Farseek, Nature's Lore, and 3 Visits, all of which are excellent staple land ramp sources that fetch up non-basic lands to help fix our 5-color mana base very reliably, as well as Cultivate, which is yet another all-star land ramp source that helps speed up our mana base while ensuring we make a land drop on the following turn, while also helping us get basics out of our deck so we can hit more Slivers throughout the course of the game. And then as our only non-ramp source in this category and only other sorcery, we have Harsh Mercy, which in this build serves as a one-sided board wipe that, against non-tribal decks, will usually decimate our opponent's boards while leaving our Sliver army very much intact and ready to crash into their now vulnerable board states. Then jumping straight into our retained artifacts, as we won't be keeping any of the enchantments from the base build, we'll begin with the ramp sources Soul Ring and Arcane Signet, which of course will be keeping their spots as excellent ramp sources that help speed up and or fix our mana base to ensure we can keep casting our slivers as quickly as we draw into them. And then to wrap up our kept artifacts, we have the tribal support pieces Herald's Horn and Vanquisher's Banner, the former providing passive cost reduction and occasional draw for our slivers, while the latter gives them a passive stat boost and turns all of them into cantrips as we cast them, making them both excellent tribal enablers to empower our creature-heavy game plan. And finally, reaching our held over mana base, since we'll be performing a massive overhaul to this category, we'll be primarily focusing our efforts onto hanging on to the most efficient lands included in the base build to provide a solid foundation for us to build upon, which will consist of Command Tower and Exotic Orchard, which can either tap for all or most of our colors respectively without sacrificing speed to do so, Secluded Courtyard and Unclaimed Territory, both of which provide any colored mana to cast our slivers and colorless mana for everything else so we can still use them to cast our other spells, the Battlelands Canopy Vista, Cinder Glade, Prairie Stream, Smoldering Marsh, and Sunken Hollow, which can usually come into play untapped in the mid to late game once we have 2+ basics in play, and whose basic land types makes them fetchable by our non-basic land ramp sources as well to provide more reliable fixing. The Tribal Tapland Path of Ancestry, which taps for any of our colors and somewhat makes up for its slow speed by providing a repeatable scry as we cast our slivers to help make our land drops in the early game, or hit more slivers in the late game, and the Trilands Frontier Bivouac, Opulent Palace, and Seaside Citadel, which may be slow but do tap for 3 of our most commonly used colors, so we'll be holding on to them despite their speed to help improve consistency. And lastly, we'll be keeping the 2 plains, 2 islands, 2 swamps, 2 mountains, and 3 forests included in the base build as our basics to round out our mana base. That leaves us with a final tally of 74 cards including basic lands we'll be keeping from the base build, leaving us with 26 cards to replace, which considering that about half of those changes are going to be to the land base should really emphasize that the deck itself is quite powerful out of the box, but also really held back by its choice of lands. So, now that we've covered all the cards that made the cut from the core build, let's move on to our upgrades. Beginning with our new creature upgrades, we'll only be making a handful of changes to our tribal lineup with either some specimens that synergize better with our commander, or that are strict upgrades to the counterparts they're replacing. In the latter camp, we'll be cutting Blur Sliver, whose tribal haste granting is very useful but its mana cost is just a bit too much, so we'll be replacing it with its slightly smaller cousin, Heart Sliver, whose smaller stat block is fine since we're mainly playing it for the AoE tribal haste, and whose lower CMC allows us to free up some more mana to cast more slivers to build up our board faster or proc our payoffs more often. Then in the former camp, we'll continue lowering our mana curve by cutting Firewake Sliver, whose stack effect is okay to enable our commander, but a bit lackluster otherwise, and the artifact Icon of Ancestry, whose tribal stat bump is okay, but whose draw costs a bit too much mana that we can and will replace with a better option later, and adding in Predatory Sliver and Muscle Sliver, both of which provide the build with more tribal lords to power up our hive mind even further, while again being excellent targets to encore out with our commander if they're destroyed, effectively providing us with 3/4/4 bodies and a board-wide +3/+3 stat bump when we do so to crash in with. Hollowhead Sliver will also be getting the axe here, whose ability to turn all our slivers into looters is pretty good for the card selection it provides us with while loading up our bin with slivers to be encored out by our commander, but it pales in comparison to its replacement, Homing Sliver, who still sets up our bin by either turning itself or all our other slivers in hand into 3-mana tribal tutors, allowing us to fetch up whatever sliver we may need for any given situation while still setting up our graveyard for Sliver Gravemother as we do so. Then, sadly, we'll be cutting the only other non-sliver in the deck, Ruka Biologist, who, don't get me wrong, can be an excellent card, particularly in the command zone of her own build, where she can combine slivers and any other tribe into one cohesive unit that can take advantage of both tribes' synergies, but here only serves as a very slow tribal token generator since our creature base is almost entirely slivers anyway. So we'll be replacing her with Thorncaster Sliver, who's a much better fit in this build thanks to benefiting from our tribal payoffs more reliably, providing the build with additional removal, of which it is sorely lacking, and being a superb target to encore back with our commander to tack on a free bolt to each one of our attacking slivers on the turn we bring them back. And lastly, as our final creature addition and the only other non-sliver creature we'll be running in this deck, the powerful but somewhat out of place wheel Windfall, which will find a much better home in a build that can either mitigate or take advantage of the fact that our opponents will draw cards off of it, will be exchanged out for the more on-theme Beast Whisperer, who takes advantage of our huge and relatively low CMC creature base to draw us cards as we cast them, which still generates us an impressive amount of card advantage, this time without potentially helping our opponents. It's then on to our instant upgrades, in which we'll be exclusively focusing on improving the build's targeted removal package to ensure we have the means to disrupt our opponent's plays. As such, we'll be cutting the lackluster tribal wipe Crippling Fear and the far too indiscriminate wipe Cleansing Nova to make room for Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares, both of which provide cheap and efficient non-destruction creature removal to help us deal with our opponent's threats while still leaving plenty of mana open for us to continue making our plays, and a multi-targeting Decimate, which is slow and a bit more limiting than it initially looks since we do need to have viable targets of all the types of permanents it destroys before we're even able to cast it, being replaced with a more flexible Beast Within, which may not hit multiple targets but makes up for it by being able to hit any kind of permanent to help us deal with any type of threat we may encounter. Then reaching our sorcery upgrades, the only changes we'll be making here will be making a slight adjustment to our ramp package by scorching the cycling land ash barrens and scrapping the mana rock Felwar stone to add the additional land ramp sources Rampant Growth and Kodama's Reach, which we're slotting in as means to get more basics into play to ensure our battle lands can more reliably come into play untapped, as well as to thin out our deck a bit more to make it more likely to hit gas in the later game instead of just more lands. Similarly, our enchantment upgrades will only see two changes as well, the first of which will see us swap out the new Descendant's Fury, which is admittedly an excellent card and can get us value by turning our encore tokens into real slivers from our deck before they sack themselves away, but in my opinion requires a lot of setup to get off the ground in this build just to statistically get a low-cost sliver from our deck into play, so we'll be replacing it with Tribute to the World Tree, which is a much better fit here as a means for us to initially grow our smaller slivers into decent-sized threats in the early game, and later, once we have a few lords in play, serving as yet another way for us to generate card advantage as our slivers enter play, both as we cast them or encore them out with our commander. Then our second and only other enchantment upgrade will see us cut Distant Melody, which is a fine if somewhat basic tribal draw source, in favor of Elven Chorus, whose combination of creature-specific Future Sight allowing us to cast creatures off the top of our deck, and the ability to turn all our creatures into 5-color mana dorks working very nicely in this build, as both a source of draw that doesn't quite rely so much on our board state compared to its predecessor to generate card advantage, while providing us with even more ramp and fixing that scales with our creature base so we can continue to cast our slivers uninterrupted. Then, as our singular upgrade to our artifacts, we'll be scrapping the tribal mana rock Pillar of Origins, which is okay but can occasionally hose us since we can't use the mana it produces to cast non-creature spells, and giving it spot to Chromatic Lantern, which is usable by all our spells and instantly fixes our mana base as soon as it comes down to ensure we don't have any issues casting any of our spells from that point forward. And finally, reaching our land upgrades, we'll be primarily focusing on speeding up the base build's glacial mana base as much as we can to ensure we can start casting our spells at a reasonable rate, as well as ensuring we have a decent number of lands we can fetch up via our non-basic land ramp sources so we don't sacrifice consistency in doing so. So to accomplish this, we'll start off by terraforming the bicycle land's irrigated farmland, scattered groves and sheltered thicket, the slow fetches flooded plain, grasslands, mountain valley and rocky tar pit, and the tri-land mystic monastery, all of which come into play tapped, into the Painlands battlefield forge, brushland, Karplushan forest, sulphurous springs, Yavimaya coast, Llanowar wastes, caves of Koilos, and Shivan reef, all of which come into play untapped and still tap for one of two of our colors by having us take a damage, which is a very small price to pay to fix our mana base quickly, and we'll only have to take a handful of times until we hit non-Painland sources of colored mana, at which point we can just use them for colorless mana at no life loss. We'll then be replacing 3 more Tri-lands, Jungle Shrine, Savage Lands, and Sandsteep Citadel, with the new Capenna Triomes, Jetmir's Garden, Zayatora's Proving Ground, and Spara's Headquarters, whose 3 basic land types makes them fetchable by any of our non-basic land ramp sources to further improve the build's consistency, and whose cycling can be useful in a pinch if we draw into them in the late game and would rather have another card. And lastly, we'll be replacing 1 more Tri-land, Nomad Outpost, with a non-basic land ramp source, Croson Verge, which may be slow, but whose ability to tutor up a non-basic forest and plains directly into play allows us to hit any of our newly added triomes, and or most of our existing battle lands from the base build to provide near-perfect fixing, while again, getting more lands out of our deck to give us a greater chance of hitting gas on future draws. So, now that we've covered all 26 cards that we've upgraded from the core build, let's take a look at the breakdown for this Precon upgrade. This deck currently has 46 creatures including our commander, 4 instants, 8 sorceries, 2 enchantments, 5 artifacts, 0 planeswalkers, and 36 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 44 slivers, 18 sources that grant our slivers keywords, 10 sources that increase our sliver stat blocks, 6 sources that protect our slivers from targeting or from removal, 52 cards that care about slivers, and 3 cards that care about any creature type, leaving us with an impressive tribal build that contains a huge number of tribe members, various means to empower them and keep them alive, and plenty of both tribal and creature-based payoffs for them to enable them further and to generate additional value. For general deck stats, we have 14 ramp sources, 11 card draw sources, 10 targeted removal sources, and 1 board wipe, with only our wipes being lower than average since we'd rather not level our boards as we'll usually be the player with a dominant board state on any given occasion, hence us having a decent number of sources dedicated to protecting our board rather than leveling it and starting over. Looking at our mana curve, we have 5 1-drops, 23 2-drops, 16 3-drops, 10 4-drops, 7 5-drops, and 3 6-drops, leaving us with a reasonably low-to-the-ground curve that enables us to quickly flood our board with slivers, rapidly building upon their innate tribal synergies more and more with each passing turn, and, should our opponents be able to remove some of our slivers in an effort to halt their onslaught, Sliver Gravemother can easily encore out 3 copies of our fallen brethren from the bin for one last devastating alpha strike, which is often all we need to turn the tide of the game in our favor or to crush our opponents outright. The final price of this build then comes out to be $133.53 after upgrades. This price does not include tax or shipping and assumes that the price you paid for the Precon was $85. The price of the cards was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. Then regarding side grades, we can honestly swap out almost any slivers in and out depending on our taste and personal playstyle, though if we're interested in getting more value out of our commander's encore ability specifically, we can make some non-sliver changes by swapping out Tribute to the World Tree and Bone Scythe Sliver for Sundial of the Infinite and Obeka Brute Chronologist, both of which can end the turn while Encore's sack effect is on the stack to nullify it, allowing us to keep our 3 sliver copies permanently, though it should be noted that these changes will make the build a bit less consistent overall. Then for further upgrades, starting with our creature base, Bone Scythe Sliver can be cut in favor of Sliver Legion, whose AoE tribal stat boost is absolutely insane with only one copy on board, but when encored out can easily provide upwards of a board-wide +20/+20 tribal stat increase on established board states to instantly close out games with. Cleaving Sliver can be benched for Sliver Overlord as a means for us to tutor up our entire tribe and dominate the mirror match should we encounter it. And a Blade Sliver can be traded for the first Sliver to turn each Sliver we cast into potentially multiple Slivers from our deck thanks to granting them Cascade to completely dominate the board with. Otherwise, I would recommend making even further changes to our land base to get even more performance out of it. For example, cutting one of our tri-lands for Sliver Hive to give us more tribal fixing along with tribal token creation should we need it, replacing our Painlands with shock lands that tap for the same colors, which provide the same fixing while also being fetchable thanks to possessing basic land types themselves, and then replacing some of our remaining tap lands with either fetch lands to allow us to grab our newly added shocks from our deck, and or additional triomes to give them more targets to hit so we can push our mana basis consistency to the bleeding edge. And lastly, if we want to include the absolute pinnacle of Sliverdom in our build, we can cast out Thorncaster Sliver in favor of the almighty Sliver Queen, who can provide us with relatively cheap and repeatable tribal token creation if we use her fairly, or can easily create infinite tokens through various combos otherwise, which is quite impressive, but we must be willing to sacrifice our food budget for a couple of months as she does cost more than all our previously shown upgrade suggestions combined. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. With the Sliver Swarm Precon upgrade complete, the next deck we'll be covering will be the Planeswalker Party Precon and its face commander, Commodore Guff, so look forward to a Super Friends Pillow Fort themed build featuring him coming soon. And lastly, before we close out, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, as this channel can't continue to grow without your support. And if you're feeling particularly generous, feel free to keep me caffeinated via buying me a coffee at the link in the description, or alternatively, use our Game Nerds affiliate link in the description if you're looking to purchase sealed MTG product, accessories, board games, or any of their other wide selection of products at low prices that include free shipping for orders over $75, and a rewards program that builds up store credit over time as you make your purchases. And if any of you would like to support the channel in a different way, feel free to check out the other deck techs floating around my head if you'd like to see the latest builds, or click on the link above for a playlist of all the Cut Rate Commander episodes I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.